Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on the Tuesday edition of Journalist Hangout. I am Kemi Foladiemo. Well, as the COVID-19 pandemic continues to spread in Nigeria, we must do more to keep ourselves safe by maintaining social distance. And today on the program, Nigeria records highest ever cases of COVID-19 in 24 hours as President Buhari seeks international cooperation to curb the spread of the virus. Later on the show, Nigeria finally receives $311 million, which has been termed Abacha loot, this from the US and Jersey Islands. I'll be hanging out today with Babajide Kolade Otitoju and Solomon Ajuziogo. Gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for
having me. Solomon, it's good to have you once again.
Thank you.
If you're ready, the discussion starts right away. We'll call it mere coincidence or some kind of foreboding. It happened that on the day the federal government relaxed the coronavirus lockdown imposed on Lagos, Abuja, and Ogun State, well, the number of cases in the country has now reached a record high. According to the data released by the Nigeria Center for Disease Control, the NCDC, the country recorded 245 infections, and that's the highest ever number of cases of COVID-19 in 24 hours. The number of deaths caused by the virus has also risen to 93. Meanwhile, President Muhammadu Buhari has called for a collective international approach to end the pandemic. While participating in a virtual meeting of the non-aligned movement, President Buhari said national, regional, and global strategy is required to effectively tackle coronavirus. And that's the crux of our discussion at this time. Babajide, so many scary statistics. First, we're dealing with incredible figures across the country, across the world, and even back home here in Nigeria, also having to contend with quite a number.
Yes, it's something to really be worried about. If you look at the number of tests that we have carried out, then you see that the rate of fatalities in Nigeria is quite high. When you bounce the number of tests that we have had against the number of our people that have died. So we still have a long way to go. It's difficult to say that we are doing very well in terms of managing this crisis. And everyone can see that, yes, while the government felt the need to ease the pain, the burden on our people by relaxing the lockdown, it looks very, very likely that most of the gains that we recorded in the weeks when we elected to sit in our homes will be wiped out by the scary scenes that played out before our eyes yesterday. In banks, the crowds were uncontrollable. The commuter drivers refused to comply with simple instructions, as we had said here, that they will not comply. That's exactly what happened. And many Nigerians simply still do not understand that it is those who are alive that live normal lives. Because I've heard people say, let them release us so that we can live, go back to our normal lives. But you must first be alive to live normal lives. And we have seen clearly that those who some time ago told us that this is a sickness for the well-to-do, for the well-heeled class, can see clearly now, given the stories emanating from Kano and from Kaduna, that a sizable proportion of those who have been tested in those two states and who also tested positive for the virus are Almajiris. These are itinerant Quranic pupils. There's no way that you can call those ones comfortable people or children of the well-to-do in our country. So this is a disease that has no regard for anyone's place in the society. You can contract it, whether you are the number one, the richest man in the world, and it can take your life, no matter your standing in the society. Our people need to understand that. I would rather stay in my home than get involved in such crowds that we saw in the banks. What's the meaning of that? You want to take some money, but you are putting your life at great risk. So this is what has happened. Some of our people still do not, until this sickness gets to their door, until this this disease gets to their door, many of our people will still not believe that this is a disease that we all have to be very careful about.
Indeed. Is this an issue of some people, or there will be this class of people who do not think that this disease exists, or are we just having, recalcitrant, people or disobedient people? Recall what Chikwe Ihekwazu said yesterday, Solomon. He too expressed disappointment in the behavior of many Nigerians yesterday at the banks and elsewhere, and predicted that just because of that singular act spread across these areas that had lockdown eased, there will be additional cases. Is that how you read it too, Solomon?
Well, I was expecting what happened yesterday. That may be a shocker, but I was expecting it. Prior to the easing of the lockdown, people had been exasperated. People were already worn out, with the fact that they are staying at home. And clearly, we have also seen that this is the most affordable way, the lockdown is the most affordable way Nigeria can can easily contain the spread of the virus. We have weak systems, so the best way to try to mitigate, because the virus will come, but the best way to stop it will be to lock down. Now, what you do within the lockdown is another thing. Now, you also have an economic situation that is not as strong. And so people felt that they were at home. A lot of them were hungry. And then it's not also something that most of them are used to, having to stay at home for so long. Yeah, there are situations where people have had to stay at home, but not this long, 5 weeks. And since this is a war, but not the kind of war they are used to, guns are not fired. So people naturally will be like, okay, so why are we home? You understand? But some of them do understand why we are home. So naturally, I expected what happened yesterday, because Nigerians have lived in cynicism. Nigerians are cynical about their own government. They are skeptical. They don't trust their government. That is one thing you have to understand about Nigerians. And so some people feel that this is even part of the game. This is even part of the thing. People hear about money spent on this, money is used for this, money is here and there. And they're like, oh, this is another kind of money round, money tripping, money. People are mentioning huge sums of money. So people just don't take this seriously. But naturally, I expected this. Then, thirdly, I spoke about strategy. Strategy. I see no semblance of strategy. The only thing closest to strategy that I saw was when the Lagos state government started reeling out, some of the measures. But then I felt that the measures just seemed to just stop at giving the instructions and telling people what to do, but the enforcement was missing. So I would have expected that at the level of interfacing, because the NCDC DG talked about knowing that what happened yesterday would happen. And the question I ask is, if the NCDC DG could admit that they knew that this was going to happen, what did they do? What scenario building did they do to be able to mitigate this? Because my worry now is what happens after this. I'm scared.
Right.
We just had 44 on the first day of the easing of the lockdown, 245. What are we going to get later today?
Absolutely. So is enforcement the missing link? We're talking about Monday. The streets are still busy. as at now. There were reports of banks, also remaining still busy, even though they gave a directive that banks should do more. You can't, shut down some branches. What happens to the remaining branches? What are you doing about online banking? Can we adopt that method more? We're talking about banks now. Of course, there are other areas, other sectors now that also, ran foul of the directive yesterday. So it is enforcement the missing link.
I don't think there is any way by which we could totally enforce this without beating the beast out of many Nigerians. I've seen the lockdown eased in some countries. I didn't see the kind of sense that I saw yesterday. Something is wrong with our people. A people who would choose to play a football match at a time when they told them that, look, stay in your homes. You chose to organize a football match. You gathered in thousands to watch it. There's even a limit to enforcement. If you roll out all the policemen in our country to say, enforce this lockdown, they will still be incapable of
overwhelm
So
them.
people must make up their minds. The day we spoke to someone in Saudi Arabia, he said the police in Saudi Arabia did not have to beat a single person. Once that decision was taken, everyone agreed that this was the right thing to do. In Lagos alone, if we were to enforce this thing in Lagos alone, how many policemen would be involved? It will mean beating people silly. It will mean beating people silly. Because, one, you look at why are people in the banks? Many people use their ATM cards and they have issues. They needed to see the customer care to have those issues resolved. Some of them, their monies are hanging. They want the banks to return such monies illegally deducted from their accounts. So it's not everyone who went to the bank who simply wanted to take money. Some went with genuine complaints. And there's hardly any day that people use the ATM that their cards don't get lodged, don't get trapped, or some monies that they ought not to lose do not simply go to the banks. So there were so many of those cases. And these guys were already, a lot of them were broke. But we are saying where you are told, for example, that look, there must be social distancing, and you are joining those who are rushing for buses without a care in the world for your own well-being. Some of the so-called educated people who are saying, look, corona does not exist. There are still people still saying it today. What can you do about those people? How do you then convince people who can see death, who can see prominent people, professors dying in Kano, and they still chose not to believe that this thing exists, and they still continue to think this is simply an avenue for government to steal money? Something is wrong with such people. In fact, such people, it's difficult to help such people. Across the world, the kind of violations of the protocols put in place that I see, I've not seen it anywhere. I challenge anybody to show me where the lockdown was eased and this kind of sins that I saw in my country was what happened. No. So, we can blame the government all we want, but there's also a big problem with us as a people. Because the people must realize first that, look, this is not a war for the government alone. And in this war, it is a lot easier for the people in government to survive than for the ordinary man to survive. So people must begin to think.
Right. So now the test has now come now, not just to those governing the country, but even the test is now on those governed. What options, Solomon, do you see now? There was the threat that the nation could revert back to a lockdown if Nigerians continue behaving this way.
First, that would be the most practical thing to do once we see the signs. And we will be expecting the signs with what we saw happen yesterday and even today. I agree that people have a responsibility to protect themselves. But then people also have the freedom to choose what they want to do. But the other way is that at times like this is when you are talking, what I saw in the whole picture of what has happened with the coronavirus situation is leadership and control. The coronavirus provided an opportunity for those in government to show real leadership and to exercise control. It moved power into the hands of the government and not just that of the people. Because what is happening at the moment does not just threaten the people, it threatens the state. And so government has to step up. I agree there's a problem with the value system of Nigerians. I agree that Nigerians are not taking responsibility for their own safety and their own life. I agree. But I think that compliance is enforced. Now, I also agree that you are probably not going to put a uniformed man, a law enforcement agent, on the shoulder of each Nigerian. That is not practicable. It can't be done. But then you must be seen, because you see, the way you use force is not the use of force itself, but the threat of the use of the elements of coercion, the agents of coercion, the visibility of these men in town to enforce, to make people comply. Sometimes they don't really need to take very necessary steps. It's just their presence. When the fuel subsidy crisis came in 2012 or thereabout, and people gathered at Ojoda, one morning they all came, and what did they see? They saw uniformed men all over the place. Nobody came close. Nobody came close to the square to make noise. So what we are saying is, look, this thing will take anybody, and it does not take hostages. This virus will hit anyone. So if it gets to the common man, then it gets to everybody. So the option before us now is that we really have to take visible steps in enforcement. The threat to enforce, the threat to enforce compliance. Look at the buses. People trooped into the buses. Now the buses, the bus conductors.
Solomon, let me put you on hold now. We have our first caller at this time now. Is it for good evening from Bayelsa State? Thank you very much for joining in at this time.
Good evening. Good evening, Babajide and Solomon. Thank you so much for the wonderful work you've been doing, enlightening our people. Well, it's unfortunate the kind of attitude we put up, especially in this pandemic. But if you look at the value system of our people, sometimes you will start thinking whether they were to be blamed. Because our government, specifically our politicians, has really, really feasted in every facet of life, of livelihood of Nigerians. And Nigerians no longer trust anything that government is saying. So far it's coming from government, they have serious elements of doubt. Now, people will say, are you telling us to stay at home, to be safe, to live? This one we're living now, is it life? It looks as if Nigeria is one of the worst of countries in the world in terms of poverty index, in terms of bad governance and all that. So it looks as people are doing everything to fend for themselves. If they stay indoors, they die. If they come to the street, they may have likelihood of getting a means of survival. It's a terrible thing we found ourselves into.
Thank you very much.
Bad governance.
Thank you very much. How do you read this perception now? We stay indoors, we die, we go out, we are equally at risk, because that was the reason why this lockdown restrictions were eased in these cities affected. The economy had to move on. People also had to earn a living.
It's people who are alive who are going to enjoy the economy. It's people who are alive who get to make money. In the first place, I oppose the idea of lifting this, easing this lockdown at this time, because I've not seen a country that decided to ease the lockdown at a time when the rate of new infections was growing. No country does that. When you've seen that you have gotten testing right, you have boosted your capacity to test. When you see
a drop
in new infections, that's when you begin to ease the lockdown. That's what the Italians have done. The Prime Minister of the UK said last week, he said, I will not, he told his people, he said, keep your impatience in check, because I'm not prepared to fritter the gains that we have made during this lockdown at this time. So it's not as if people are not impatient in London as well. When people say, oh, in the UK and other places, government gives people money, it's only those who are involved in the economy, who pay taxes, that get anything. And it's not even everyone who has received something at this time, even in those countries. You get the point that I'm making? So the truth is, yes, you want the economy to begin to do well. You can ease, but not when suddenly we are seeing a spike. That's when you chose to ease the lockdown. Nobody does that. I'm afraid nobody does that. I gave the example of Malaysia. Malaysia has seen a drop in new cases, yet the Malaysian leader chose to extend the lockdown because he felt it was, even at that time, still premature.
Too early.
If you see what Spain, they have a plan. The UK, they have a plan. And these things are in phases. In Italy now, they said, okay, you can move around, but you can only move around within regions. And we all know that the rate of fatalities has gone down drastically in Italy. In fact, last Sunday, only 260 persons died. Whereas in the past, they would die, more than 1,000 would die. But they have chosen to ease this thing in phases. What do I mean by phases? You allow people to go to the salons on May 2nd. You then say, okay, football clubs, you can begin to train from June 18. You know, it's not like, oh, today, let everybody go out. You don't do that.
There's also the issue of inter-border closure. That remains banned except for really essential needs now, and certain sectors allowed to ply these roads. But then we are still seeing, of course, the clumsy nature now of those who work in Lagos yet living in Ogun State. We've seen the proximity, you know, of these two states now. You can be a foot apart from these two states, if you know what I mean. Were these scenarios now, were they, you know, accurately seen beforehand? Could they have been avoided?
Well, I would say that it would be a bit erroneous for me to assume that the people who had the responsibility to take these decisions did not think of this. But obviously, it's not looking like they did. When you see the outcomes, then you begin to ask yourself if they did. I thought about that part of it, and I told myself, well, if you live in Ogun State and you are involved in essential services and you work in Lagos, certainly you would be able to come into Lagos. But then, because the lockdown has been eased, and then you give instructions that, okay, interstate movements are stopped. What did you see at the borders? What did you see at the border between Lagos and Ogun State? It didn't look like it at all. So
there are no physical boundaries.
That's the point. You understand? So at this point, you now ask, so what are you doing in that area to check the movement? At what point? What is the level of interface between those in authority and the private sector? Now, I have observed what has been going on. We come on TV, we make announcements, we expect people to comply, and we give the burden of compliance, voluntary compliance to the people. There's an extent to which the burden of voluntary compliance will be carried by the people. You have to force people at certain level to do certain things. That is one. I see that as not feasible, as something that cannot be done except you really, really enforce that. That's a very difficult thing to do. I'm afraid, like Jide said, the last time we had less than 100 cases was on the 27th of April. And since the 28th of April, we've had more than 200. So we've had on the average of 200 cases per day. And so it's climbing up, it's moving up. And it's a bit surprising that at this time, the president yielded to the pressure, in quote, to ease the lockdown. Now we are looking at a situation where we saw the people, we saw the crowd, and we might just be going back to another lockdown.
Let's quickly spare a few moments now. If we just pan a little slightly, now if we look at the options out there, Bauchi State was reported to have said, okay, they would now explore the use of this drug, this chloroquine drug now, said it worked for him. Let's also explore that now. But with the rising prices of chloroquine now, we're seeing people also, taking some efforts now to guard themselves for personal use and beyond. But Bajide, what do you make of that? Is this something you would endorse?
Yes. In some countries like France, hydroxychloroquine has been combined with other drugs to treat patients, suffering from coronavirus, and they've been healed. There is no particular drug for now that the WHO has endorsed. Countries are looking inwards and trying all kinds of remedies, some of them going herbal, like Madagascar going herbal. But hydroxychloroquine has been used in many countries. In fact, Trump has already spoken with the Indians to help manufacture doses of hydroxychloroquine because it has proven useful. The symptoms of this disease are similar to that of malaria. The only problem, and some malaria drugs would work, the only problem is it has to be administered by a physician, by an expert. What I would not want to see is a situation in which Nigerians are rushing to chemists, rushing to pharmacists.
To arm themselves.
Yes, this is a drug that is no longer on our list of permitted drugs. We brushed chloroquine aside a long time ago. But as the NAFDAC DG said, there was a test carried out in China earlier on, which showed that hydroxychloroquine could be effective in treating, by the law of averages, it showed that hydroxychloroquine can be effective in treating coronavirus.
But we've also seen, if you look at the body language of the government, whether indeed they may be exploring, the use of this hydroxychloroquine now, or perhaps they are using other forms, because indeed now scientists and physicians have said that what we are dealing with is a mixture of, malaria, as Babajide said, and flu. So is this something we should, also give full weight support to? Because I recall at the early days, the Commissioner of Health in Lagos, Professor Abayomi, had said, okay, even if it is being used abroad, we have to also, look at our climate and certain other factors now before we say, yes, we endorse the use of these drugs.
I think there are some issues we are overflogging, where we have to wait for. The WHO is not the health regulatory organization of the world. The WHO does not have its own mechanism to do some of these things. WHO is just an aggregate of independent nations and the medical people just coming together to agree. And so you do not need the WHO to endorse a particular medical practice, because you have scientists in Nigeria, you have medical scientists in Nigeria, you have proven medical scientists, and you have standard clinical practice that is endorsed by the Medical Association of this country. You have all the experts on the panel on how you can develop procedures for approval of drugs and medication for clinical therapy. So the point is we don't have to wait for what you call the Brentwood institutions to prescribe to us what we need to do. We have the Ministry of Health, we have the medical people, we have the NMA here, who can do these things. Whatever is applicable that can work for us like it's working in Madagascar, let's apply it. And that's what's important.
Indeed. Well, that's the much we can take at this time on this. Now, we would definitely move on. But in the meantime, though the lockdown in Lagos, Abuja and Ogun has been eased, the task of getting food and other palliatives to some indigent Nigerians shouldn't stop. We'll get to that in a moment. Stay with us. Thank you very much for staying with us on Journalists Hangout on TVC News. Well, though the lockdown in Lagos, Abuja and Ogun State has been eased, the task of getting food and other palliative items to some indigent Nigerians shouldn't stop. The lawmaker representing Agege constituency of Lagos in the House of Representatives, Samuel Babatunde Adejare, provided cash items for more than 2,000 constituents. The member representing Ohaji Egbema Oguta Oru West constituency of Imo State also distributed palliatives to his people. This including the chairman of the Amuwo Odofin local government area of Lagos, Valentine Buraimo, who handed over food relief packages to the vulnerable in the community. Noble deeds here by these and several other Nigerians. Babajide, what do you make of this? How far will these, palliatives, get across people? How much good have you seen on record here?
Yes, we challenge them to try to ease the pain on the people, try to bring down the tension in the land by giving palliative items to their constituents. Because at the time we began to talk about this, some lawmakers didn't even think it was necessary. And our argument is you can't be distributing money, distributing gari during elections, and when the people truly need it the most, you then choose to ignore them. Because it's just not practical for government to be able to reach everyone. So as their representatives, it was necessary to begin to give those things. I'm happy that we can report that there is improvement along that line. Honorable Juchima Kingsley, representing Ohaji Egbema Oguta, Oru West Federal Constituency of Imo State, has empowered his constituents with food items, medication, cash to the vulnerable. He also distributed generators, grinding machines, among other packages that will enable them to set up small-scale businesses. Honorable Babatunde Samuel Adejare, a medical doctor and former commissioner in Lagos State, has also reached 2,700 vulnerable people, distributed 10,000 each to 350 political and religious bodies, and 50,000 to some community leaders in the area. And then, of course, we have Valentine Buraimo, executive chairman, Amuwo Odofin, who has distributed food items to thousands of indigent people in the area. The first batch was 5,000 and then 7,500. They distributed food packs like rice, beans, semovita, wheat, and noodles. So we want them to keep this coming.
More.
We want them to do a lot more because our people are hungry, our people are starving. A lot of them have not recovered from the lockdown. But
Indeed.
At least when help comes in this manner, they will be grateful.
Absolutely. It also appears, or it's rather obvious, that this is also not a one-off deed. Now, for some people, before they recover, even for the nation and for sectors and companies, before they recover, they will still be needing more aid. What do you think about that, Solomon?
5 weeks is a very long time, even in the life of a country. So you could have imagined the lack of economic activity that went on over the 5-week period and its implication for Nigeria. And you know what the prices of oil is talking about now, and you know that this country lives on. More than 90% of the country's resources come from there. So to imagine that the people within the country also did not involve in real economic activities. Some people who have to depend on daily earnings couldn't earn anything. So at this time, they will need the buffer. So what you saw yesterday is just one of the reflections first of the sort of thing that went on for 5 weeks. Some people didn't work, and then they had to hit town, they had to hit the market, they had to, hit their hustle, as they call it, on the streets again, throwing all cautions to the wind. So it's a good thing that these well-meaning Nigerians and political leaders will do more of these, at least until this really tapers down.
All right. Perhaps we should just move on now, seeing how far time has gone now. Let's also, ponder on this interesting developing story where in times of scarcity, stumbling on a hidden treasure is like hitting gold. And at this time of revenue shortfall owing to the fall in oil prices and the coronavirus pandemic, Nigeria has confirmed receipt of $311 million looted by the late Maximum Ruler General Sani Abacha. In a statement, the Attorney General of the Federation and Minister of Justice, Abubakar Malami, said the asset tagged Abacha Part 3 was repatriated from the United States and Jersey after conclusion of the litigation and diplomatic processes by the governments of Nigeria as well as the US and Jersey Islands. Well, but getting money is one thing, spending it well is a different ballgame. What do you think, Babajide?
Yes, I think in this case, Nigeria has committed itself to spending the money on critical infrastructure, roads, especially the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, and of course the second Niger Bridge. So, and the government has engaged an NGO that will help it in monitoring compliance with the agreement reached with its partners. It's important that we do this because the reputation, the notion out there is, once the looted money is sent to Nigeria, it is then relooted. That shouldn't happen. We should be able to point to what we were able to do with the money. Even if we start a project from the scratch and we complete that project with that money, people will be happy. They'll be able to say, thanks to the money that Abacha looted, we are able to do this. They can call it Abacha 3, but it is Abacha Loot Part 3. Maybe there's a reason why somebody tagged it Abacha 3. You can't hoodwink us. It is Abacha Loot Part 3. Somebody looted so much money. But today we are grateful. We are grateful to the Supreme Court of Nigeria because the Supreme Court late last year ruled that the Abacha family would not have access to some foreign accounts that had been frozen. When Obasanjo got into office, one of the first things he did was to get Nigeria's partners to help us track Abacha loot. They got in touch with a Swiss lawyer, Enrico Franini. Enrico Franini traced $2.4 billion stolen by Abacha. And then the challenge was for us, because the mandate I also got was to not just trace the money, but do its best to facilitate repatriation. So Enrico Franini, the Swiss lawyer, has delivered. So I remember we got from the Swiss government alone in 2014 or so, we got $500 million. So this money remains. That is after the Abacha family willingly conceded $1.3 billion to Nigerian government based on an agreement reached with the Obasanjo regime in 2004. But they felt that they were entitled to another $1 billion hidden in different accounts in Luxembourg, Liechtenstein, the UK, Channel Island of Jersey, France, Switzerland, All of these countries, they had different accounts there. But because Nigeria engaged a smart lawyer, we were able to trace those monies, and we are still getting those monies. Court cases have stopped us from getting all of the money at once. But this particular money that they sent to us was based on a judgment in December 2014. You know, so based on that, the government was the court ruled that the government must release that money to Nigeria. So we still have a long way to go.
Absolutely.
There are still monies stolen by the boggled dictator that we will still get in the coming days, as long as our partners in the Global Settlement Agreement continue to track those monies where they are.
Indeed. Of course, the concern also remains, how do we spend this money? If you recall, the one that, we got from the Swiss government as part of this Abacha loot, the previous one, both governments assured that the money would be, spent on the poor. And we've seen the government, involving itself in a host of, activities, sending out monies across. But how well are you satisfied with how the money was spent then? Now this one is to be spent on critical infrastructure, including the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. Do you want that trend to continue, the trend of spending the monies? Was it transparent enough?
What is money meant for? It's to be spent. The most important thing is that when it is spent, that the people would see what it is spent for. You cannot gather money and keep it somewhere. It's of no use for anyone if you just keep money somewhere. And what people who have stolen money in this country have always done is to take these monies and take them abroad and keep them somewhere where those monies are used by the countries and the places where they keep them. Sometimes, a lot of times, when people steal these monies, one of the things that they do is that they are the only ones who know the code. Their wives don't know the code, their children don't know the code, and then the money is there. They might eventually not even get to get the money for themselves. They leave the world, they die, leaving the money is there, and then what happens? Who owns the money? These are some of the problems we've always had. Now, the point is, when we get this money, they are meant to be spent. And the question has always been, so what are the things that the monies are used for? The one you talked about from Switzerland was the federal government said it spends that on social investment programs. Well, social investment programs are probably not as tangible as some of us might seem. The average man on the street will probably not see it as tangible as it were. So social investment will talk about trader money, things, and Empower and the rest of them and all of that. So the thing is, to what extent has Empower or trader money, for instance, changed the lives of the people, really empowered the people? That is one thing on the other. The other thing is, if you are spending on infrastructure, because since 2018, this government appears to have repatriated about $630 million of this loot, which is in excess of 2.4 billion and above, But they've repatriated 630 since 2018. And the question is, if you have repatriated as much as $630 million, I want to see what it has done. I didn't need trader money. I didn't need Empower. So some people have benefited from it. So they should as well give us a lot of abounding testimonies of what it has done for them. But I want to see the infrastructure. I'm happy the railway is coming back. I've seen the work going on. I want to see other things and be certain that these are things that also have ripple effect. They create wealth, infrastructures you build, and then it creates wealth in return. So it's not just that we are sinking money, because we have a way of throwing money at things in this country. We just throw money at things and we feel that's enough.
So, of course, and yet another big challenge, is so that we don't replicate this cycle of loot on the nation's treasury, of attack, so to speak, on the citizenry. So we may not be able to quantify the humongous loot now, under the Abacha regime now, but how do we prevent, this repatriated loot from being looted again? the question has also been coined in a way that how do we strengthen individuals, government people, so to speak, institutions to make them accountable?
Yeah, I think now that they've decided that they're going to spend it on infrastructure, and they will permit a non-governmental organization to monitor the project and the spending. I think this is particularly new. As long as Nigerians see that that project that is already more than 4 years old now is completed, I mean the Lagos-Ibadan Expressway, as long as Nigerians see that it's completed, they will be happy. The president gave a mandate that it must be completed this year. So their language is that they want to use that money to expedite work on that project. So, and then of course we've been taking money from the sovereign wealth account to fund the second Niger bridge. With this money available, some of it can also go there. So that way, you can at least point to something that they used the money for. But only strong institutions will stop us from having situations like this. I know that under a dictatorship, the greatest looters in the history of the world were dictators.
Actually,
Mobutu Sese Seko was a dictator, and he was also a big looter. Abacha was a dictator. Nobody could question him. But in a situation in which we have a democracy, and even the president needs to get approval before he can spend some money, nobody can steal this kind of money in today's world under a democracy. Even a minister has a ceiling above which he cannot spend. It has to be appropriated for before you can spend that money. So it's the strong institutions that we need. Before now, we didn't have EFCC. But with the EFCC, people know that they have to be careful. Yes, they are not there yet. We expect them to be much more effective. But they will get there. We need strong institutions, not strong individuals. It is those strong institutions that will outlast strong individuals. There are countries of the world where you cannot even steal. If you are in government, you steal 1 naira. Whether you are a former president or not, you go to jail. I've seen former prime minister in Israel put on trial. I've seen former presidents of countries put on trial for stealing so little. That is what strong institutions do. Because, look at, if you don't pay tax, for tax evasion in some countries in Europe, the punishment that you get is greater than that of manslaughter. Because they know that you must pay your tax. It is from your tax that they run the country. So anybody who chooses not to pay his tax is in trouble. We have to get to that point where our laws will be truly effective and our institutions will be very, very effective. That way, we will defeat corruption, because some countries of the world have defeated corruption. That is a fact. And I've always said that there's a difference between stealing and corruption. Some countries of the world have defeated corruption, but they've not defeated stealing, especially petty stealing. You get the point that I'm making?
And that is worse?
Petty stealing, no, petty stealing is not, it can't be worse.
It can't be.
Where some people are stealing billions, no, it can't be. So we have said the system and the institutions make it extremely difficult for you to steal without trace. We have to get there. It makes me sad when I hear that, oh, Abacha was saving that money for us. But February 7, 2020, it was the Supreme Court that saved us, because the family still went to court seeking to unfreeze accounts that our partners helped us to freeze. Because they were personal accounts of the dictator. So if he was keeping the money for us, as I learned one of the former aides of the late dictator said, why would the family go to court seeking to
fight for it?
Yes. So people want to venerate Abacha and make Abacha look like the hero that he was not. These are the kind of stories that they tell us. But history is never kind to looters.
Absolutely.
You can lie the way you want.
Absolutely.
But the facts are there.
The facts speak.
You can call it what you like, but the facts are there.
Indeed. And you're talking about, institutions now. If we it's rather obvious. We have them. We have the institutions before you even get to the courts. Now we have the whistleblower policies now. We have them. So what is the problem now? Are we paying lip service? What do we really need to unveil to be serious about this business?
I think that we're a country of people who like to talk, and we do not walk the talk. We like to talk. That's one thing. Then another thing is that, well, we're talking about Abacha today. I assume that the reason why it's so easy to talk about Abacha today is that he's late.
That's not true.
And
Yaradua is dead. Nobody can point to anywhere. Shagari is dead. I hear this story.
I am not comparing Abacha with
People
Yaradua.
don't know Abacha. No. People don't know Abacha when they say, oh, it's because he's dead. Even Abacha, when he was alive, was buying houses that he didn't need in that city. I've done stories. He was a special looter. No doubt about it. It has nothing to do with the fact that he's dead. I can point to Nigerian leaders who are dead that you cannot say, okay,
I do agree that Abacha looted. I also think that there are more looters that we're also not talking about because
his record is greater. His record is greater.
Well,
if you have proof that those ones are looted, come forward with your proof.
True.
That is the thing. Yaradua was an exemplary leader. He was a president of this country. He never looted in that manner. Shagari was a president and he died just recently. He lived a simple life.
Gentlemen, let me put you both on hold. Let's quickly hear from David, who is joining us from Kaduna. Good evening.
Hello, good evening.
Good evening. Apologies for keeping you. Please carry on.
No issue.
Carry on, please.
Yeah.
Carry on. We're running out of time. Please carry on.
Yeah. Okay. So, I really want to... Good evening to you all. I'm sure you are keeping safe.
We are trying our best.
Okay. So I would like to contribute to this Abacha loot issue. I believe the best way we can assist the masses and assist the government is to become more transparent. If there is a lot of transparency in showing the people this is where our money has gone to, it will help to increase the credibility of the government. Because most of us have this insinuation that this money is going to be relooted. So I am calling on the government, on the media, all the medias to put their eyes on that money to make sure that the money is used judiciously.
Okay.
Thanks a lot. Thanks again for holding on. So yes, now the challenge is, present the evidence, but on the record, these we really can't ignore.
But I'm also a bit disturbed because SERAP had actually written, activating the Freedom of Information request here from the Attorney General to give us a record of how the money since 1999 of the Abacha loot has been spent, and the ministry is saying that they don't even have a record, of all of these things. So they need to do more to be transparent, to show Nigerians exactly where this money is going to and what they are doing with it. It's not sufficient to just say it.
All right, a fine place to rest our conversation, rather enriching, really interesting. Thank you very much, Babajide Kolade Otoju. Always a delight with you on the show. Solomon Ajuziogu, thank you very much. That's the program this evening. Thank you too for keeping us company. Join us tomorrow for another episode of the program. You can also watch on this Hangout on other platforms showing on your screen. We're also on YouTube at youtube.com/TVC News Nigeria. And our feedback channel is Journalist Hangout at tvcnews.tv. I'm Kemi.